Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Office of the Vice President for Research's 2021 Celebration of Research and Innovation, Day 2 Spotlight on Connected Research on Learning with comments from President Englert. I'm Kimberly Reinagel, Executive Director in the Office of the Vice President for Research, and I want to go over a few logistical notes before we begin today's program. If you have any technical issues during today's meeting, please contact Temple University's IT support, Mitch Delaney at mitchd@temple.edu, or Zoom technical support at 1-888-799-9666 and select option 2. Details on this are also being shared in the webinar chat now. The audio for today's webinar will be streamed through your computer speakers or through the call-in feature, depending on which you selected. Please submit any questions you have through the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If we are unable to get to your questions during the meeting, they will be posted on OVPR's website. Today's webinar is being recorded. That recording and the meeting slides will also be posted on our website after the meeting. I'm now happy to turn things over to President Englert.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Day 2 of Temple University's 2021 Celebration of Research and Innovation Achievements. It's really a delight to be with you today. I'm just delighted to be with you to celebrate the successes of Temple University's research enterprise. Today, we're especially going to spotlight connected research on learning. Now, today's format will feature presentations from faculty in my own home college, the College of Education and Human Development. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I want to say I equally like every one of our 17 schools and colleges equally. However, in full disclosure, I must admit that I was once Dean of the College of Education, and then it was College of Education rather than College of Education and Human Development. And I also spent 4.5 years in South Central Los Angeles as an elementary school teacher. So I must say, I love education. So I'm especially interested that the focus of these presentations will be on how children learn, the fundamentals for early learning and development, and the challenges that children are facing during this year-long pandemic. Research on learning and child development is really critical for helping our university to advance its educational mission. The fundamental learning experiences that children have shape their lifelong educational journeys in really profound ways. We know that a strong foundation prepares them to succeed throughout their lifelong education. Temple is a destination for students from all walks of life who want to further develop their talents by connecting with dedicated faculty and engaging in our dynamic learning environment here. The research that today's faculty presenters will share informs our collective understanding of the needs that learners have and that they need to establish the excellence of this university, because that's what we're really about, is helping to understand learners' needs and helping them to really perform in life. This year's Temple University's College of Education and Human Development achieved a new milestone in its own excellence. It is now ranked number 39 in the nation in the 2022 US News and World Report rankings. This achievement is particularly poignant as we reflect on the massive work that the faculty has done, and it's an amazing faculty, but what the faculty has done to pivot to online and hybrid learning models and to help our students gain the very, very best education possible in this environment. I also want to point out that our students university-wide have achieved at the highest levels. Let me give you some examples. Just over the past 5 years, our students, our Temple University students, have won such national honors as a Rhodes Scholar, 5 Goldwater Scholars, a Gates Cambridge Scholar, a Knight Hennessy Scholar, a Udall Scholar, a Carnegie Endowment for International Peace Fellow, and just this past year, a total of 16 Fulbright student scholars, putting us in the very top ranks, the top 25 of Fulbright producers in the country. This comes because our students not only are great, but they are able to work with great faculty. I have no doubt that the ability of our students to study with faculty actively engaged in cutting-edge research is one of the prime reasons why our students are able to secure such prestigious honors. Finally, I want to thank Julie Booth, the Deputy Dean of Academic Affairs and Graduate Faculty in the College of Education and Human Development. And I'd like to thank all of today's presenters, Anne-Marie Heineman, Janelle Bailey, Tim Patterson, Insa Khan, and Leah Sandalos. Thank you. Thank you for all of what you do for the College of Education and Human Development and for your passionate, really passionate advocacy for young people everywhere, a passion that I have seen firsthand in my working with so many of you. And of course, I want to thank our great Vice President for Research, Michelle Masucci, and her amazing team. Michelle, we really owe you and your entire research administration, all your research administration colleagues, we owe you an eternal debt of gratitude for your leadership and support for research throughout Temple. It is now my pleasure to welcome our great provost, Joanne Epps, who is also one of the university's strongest supporters of our research mission, one of our strongest supporters of faculty, and one of our strongest supporters of students throughout the institution. Joanne.
Thank you, President Englert. I really very much am delighted to join with President Englert to welcome all of you to today's research celebration. And I want to start by where President Englert mentioned Michelle Masucci and add my personal compliments, Michelle, and statement of appreciation to you and your team. You have done remarkable things at Temple University in leading our research effort. And I'm really thrilled that we are now embarking on a 3-day celebration to focus on research and innovation. Your leadership has been remarkable, and you really do, we owe you a debt of gratitude. This 3-day celebration that we are undertaking, as I just said, focuses on research and innovation. And I think it goes without saying at the time we find ourselves in this world, we need research, we need innovation, we need people to look around and identify things that could be different, could be better, could be improved, and to lend their talents to that. And it is really a delight to be part of the celebration of those efforts. This celebration coincides with a number of events that are being held across our schools and colleges throughout this past week. Our College of Public Health held its Research and Evidence-Based Practice Day. The Kornberg School of Dentistry held its Science and Dental Practice Day last Friday. This coming Friday, the School of Pharmacy and Genentech will present a virtual research recognition day. This year's undergraduate research symposium is being held online today and tomorrow as well. Part of why we're here, though, of course, is to honor President Englert for his unwavering commitment to the university and his unwavering commitment to its research efforts. As you all know, he is a champion for this institution, the achievements of our students and our faculty, and the ways in which Temple has always been and continues to be ready to meet the next challenge. As we all know, there are many people who are big fans of Temple University, but there aren't a whole lot that actually bleed cherry. President Englert bleeds cherry. Today's event gives us an opportunity to recognize and thank him for his dedication and his leadership. And one way to do this is by showcasing the research of the faculty of the College of Education and Human Development, with whom President Englert just described his affiliation. Julie Booth has done a wonderful job of organizing today's presentations that focus on how children learn. We are proud of the many accomplishments that the president identified in his remarks. Research in the College of Education and Human Development aims to address the world's understanding of the challenges facing education in an urban environment. We are well situated to be the leader in this area, and it is really outstanding to know that the efforts of the college are being recognized in a variety of ways. Faculty members in the college are also using research to affect policy and change by addressing some of the most critical problems in education. As a reminder to something we all know, that's what universities should do. We should put our efforts into research, into solving future problems, and effectuating solutions through policy changes. So kudos to the College of Education and Human Development for excelling in this particular area. A hallmark of the college is its community connectedness through its longstanding partnerships with the Philadelphia School District, schools throughout the city, families, and a myriad of other stakeholders who share in the commitment to improving education. Research on childhood learning and development makes a difference. It's one of the ways in which the College of Education and Human Development's faculty and its students contribute to the college's reputation as a leader in urban community initiatives. So today we celebrate all the successes the faculty have had in their pursuit of their work against the challenging backdrop of a COVID pandemic and its impact on the university. It's been a very difficult year for many people, but it also has taught us so many things that we might not otherwise have known about ourselves, about our interaction with our colleagues, about the work that needs to be done. And I think we are all at this point poised with great optimism for the year and years to come. So President Englert, I want to take this opportunity personally to thank you for your leadership of Temple University. There'll be many times when we will celebrate it. Your leadership of the College of Education as its dean, your support of research across the university. Your support has not been episodic. It has been enduring and constant. And for that, I want to take a personal opportunity to thank you. You deserve a tremendous amount of credit for where this university finds itself today. So with that, I'd like to turn the program back to Michelle Masucci. Michelle, thank you again for your leadership.
Thank you so much, Joanne and President Englert, for your very, very kind words. As the Provost and President noted, every year we bring together the community connected to research and innovation to celebrate the university's successes and faculty achievements. We like to do that in person, but we have opted to do that virtually this year because it's the opportunity that we have been afforded. We celebrate together the milestones reached by our inventors and the technologies they produce. We also recognize that research requires many champions who dedicate time and energy to the mission of advancing research at the university, often in unheralded ways. This year, I want to thank President Englert for his unwavering commitment to faculty research endeavors, which, as Joanne so poignantly noted, he enthusiastically supports both publicly and I think most importantly for the research community behind the scenes in ways that you wouldn't know. As Joanne pointed out, Dick indeed bleeds cherry. Everyone knows that. We say it all the time, President Englert. Sometimes we say it to you directly, but just know that we say it behind the scenes because what that means is that you are steadfast and dedicated in championing our students, our faculty, and the work we do to advance the educational journeys for our students as they pursue a quest for knowledge through research. I hope everyone is virtually cheering you because that's the one thing that we can't do in this environment is to really let you understand how warmly and how emphatically we believe that. We also wanted to share this event today as a means of recognizing your outstanding and long-lasting contributions to the research community and for your role in promoting and highlighting our successes at this tremendous time of transition. And I think you got a flavor of that just a few minutes ago when the president was able to just talk about all the achievements that have been happening in the college and for our undergraduate and graduate students, as well as for our faculty in countless ways. And in meeting after meeting, I hear Dick go through this, and you should just know that he is constantly singing those praises, and it comes, we all know, from a very, very genuine place in Dick's heart. And that's why we are so grateful to you for your service and your leadership. So I'm going to turn it back over to you if you care to make any additional comments, President Englert, and then after that, we'll pick up with our program.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Joanne. I have tears in my eyes because of the warmth of your comments. So thank you. And let me just say that being at an institution that has research and has the kind of research that our great faculty engages in with students, it makes all the difference, earlier, just before I got on this program, I walked over to Whitehall, and right now we are giving vaccinations. And who's giving vaccinations? Some of our pharmacy faculty, some of our pharmacy students, some of our podiatric medicine students. And why can we do this? Because we're a research university where research, education, and community service all come together. The kind of research that our faculty are engaging in spills over in so many ways to benefit literally thousands, tens of thousands, if not millions of people. So what you do, what our faculty does in its research truly, truly makes a difference. This is not theoretical research. This is research that changes people's lives. So I just want to thank all of you. Thank you for everything you do for Temple University. Thank you especially what you do for our students and for our communities that we serve. We're a service organization. That's what we're about. That's why we're all part of Temple University. That's why I've been here for 45 years, because of our service mission. What we do is amazing. And specifically what we do, I get to say we, but it's really what you do. And I just kind of hang along. And my job is to support and encourage and urge and do all kinds of things. But you're the ones who do it. So thank you for everything you do. Truly, truly God's work, and truly the best. I can't think of a better place to be than Temple University. So thanks, everybody. And Godspeed to all of you. Everyone stay well. And I wish, as I have told a few people already, I could stay on for the entire this program, but unfortunately responsibilities drag me elsewhere. And believe me, if it weren't for those responsibilities, I'd be here. But I will look at the recordings. So thanks, everybody. And thank you for all you do for Temple University. Take care.
Thank you, President Englert. I'm going to move on with our program by introducing Julie Booth, who will be presiding over the presentations. Julie is the Deputy Dean of Academic Affairs and Graduate Faculty and Professor of Teaching and Learning in the College of Education and Human Development. Her research interests lie in translating between cognitive science, cognitive development, and education by finding ways to bring laboratory-tested cognitive principles to real-world classrooms. Her work also identifies the prerequisite skills and knowledge necessary for learning, and it examines individual differences in the effectiveness of instructional techniques based on learner characteristics. She recently won the Linking Research and Practice Outstanding Publication Award from the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. We in research work closely with her through her role as the Associate Dean responsible for research in the college to engage in research and development strategy and operations for the university and across the enterprise every week. We're grateful for the role that she plays, and as evidenced by the very exciting panel that she has put together for this afternoon. So without further delay, I am turning the program over to Julie Booth. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. We're so honored to count President Englert among our faculty ranks, and we're really excited today to highlight some of the innovative and transformative research that scholars in the College of Education and Human Development are doing relevant to children and adolescents learning. This session is going to take on a fire hose format, which you may or may not be familiar with, but how it will work is that 6 scholars will briefly present findings from their programs of research with just 1 or 2 slides to give you the highlights, the key findings from what they're doing. They'll each talk for a few minutes, and I will help transition us between the speakers. Then at the end, we will have time for questions. If you have a question for one of the speakers or for the panel in general, at any time you can feel free to use the Q&A feature, and then those will be funneled to me to be used then at the end of the session to guide our discussion. Without further ado, I want to get us started. First up with Dr. Anne-Marie Heineman, who is one of our professors in the College of Education and Human Development. Take it away, Anne-Marie.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be here. I just wanted to start with a quick thank you actually for President Englert. I've been in the college for 13 years, and across that entire span of time, he has just been an incredible pillar. His really steady leadership and also his innovation have made the college and the university a wonderful place to do research. So I'm so grateful for that. If you could advance my slide, today I'm going to tell you a little bit about a project that I'm working on with a colleague, Dr. Barbara Wasick, that involves supporting toddlers in poverty in building language and vocabulary skills. So most of us know that early childhood is a really important time for development. When you think about a toddler, a child between the ages of 1 and 3, you probably picture a small human sort of staggering through the world, touching everything, trying to climb everything, and that's true. But on the inside, there's really a lot of brain development happening. So toddlers are learning language. They're learning how to physically move through the world. They're learning how to socially be with other people. So toddlerhood is a really critical time for development. That's especially true for children who have special needs. And in early childhood, speech and language disorders are very common. So that's a big umbrella term, but it really refers to children who have difficulty understanding language and or producing language. And in the sites that we work with in my team, folks who are supporting toddlers in poverty, we often see 1 in 4 children or 1 in 3 children who are at risk for language disorders. So it's a very significant problem in the field. Thankfully, one of the best early interventions is a very simple one, and that's conversation. So young children really benefit from the opportunity to talk with an adult, to have back and forth exchange where they get to hear new words and use new words and get feedback on what they've said. So those conversations are really key for development. Unfortunately, toddler classrooms also often make conversations a little bit difficult. And that's because you have 4 to 6 children for every individual teacher. So teachers are scanning the landscape all the time, making sure everyone's safe, figuring out where everyone has gone. And it makes it very hard to find time to talk one-on-one with each child. So in fact, much of the language in toddler classrooms is teachers telling kids where to be and making sure everybody's safe. So a little more talking at kids than talking with them. So in order to take advantage of this most important time for our most vulnerable children, teachers really need feasible, flexible, research-based tools that can help them bring conversations and vocabulary words to life in the classroom. So if you could show the next slide, I'll talk about our project, which aims to develop just such a set of tools. We were fortunate to get some funding in the form of a 5-year grant from the US Department of Education to build a package of professional development supports to help them bring these classrooms around vocabulary to life and support the early learning of young children at risk. So we're working with teachers. We're in year 3 of this project. So we don't have really strong outcomes data yet. That'll come in years 4 and 5, but I'll tell you a little bit about the program that we've developed and our preliminary data that are very positive. So we're working with teachers over a whole school year. We spend a whole year with them, and we're really providing 2 packages of things. On the lower left-hand side of this graphic, you can see a little schematic. What we've done is identified 4 kind of key components of conversations, and we provide training on those 4 components. So we looked at the messy network of interaction that is a conversation and tried to really identify 4 specific things that teachers could fit into their day. So one thing we train teachers to do is to talk to children. So use rich and descriptive language throughout the classroom. Another thing we train them in is to ask questions. Children really need opportunities to use words, and so questions are critical. A third thing we train on is assisting children in answering those questions. So especially for children who have speech and language disorders, it's difficult for them to answer a question on the fly often. So teachers need to provide some special help to get kids to that answer. And finally, we train them to provide feedback on what children have said so that kids get some information about how they've used a word, pronounced it, and also maybe extend that conversation into more give and take so kids have even more opportunity to use language. So on the one hand, we're training teachers in these sort of building blocks of conversations. The second package of things that we provide is stuff to talk about. So we looked at the classroom year and we identified about 50 vocabulary words that toddlers should probably learn by the time they head to preschool. We took each of those words and we found books, storybooks, informational books, props or pictures that represent, so books that include those words, props or pictures that represent those words, and then we build activities around the classroom that use those words so that children are having opportunity all throughout the day to have conversations about the same words. So we've got the sort of fundamentals of conversation training, and then the stuff to talk about. And together, they really connect to create sort of a 360-degree surround of language and vocabulary for kids, so that young children are getting these opportunities they need to learn the language that they're going to need to use when they get to preschool and then on to kindergarten. So again, just a little bit of quick information about what we see so far. We've been able to look at our teachers' practices. We've got teacher data. And so we can see that teachers are picking up the strategies we're asking them to use and using the materials. And we have really good quality education going on in these classrooms. We feel good about that. We start collecting child data in the fall, and then the final year, the 5th year, is our randomized control trial. So we hope to be able to report back after that. COVID has been a little bit of a wrinkle. We really are prepared to provide these materials for face-to-face instruction. So teachers are sitting in the same room as children. That hasn't been possible. Teachers have been teaching over Zoom, which has been really interesting with 2-year-olds. But we were able to pivot and translate many of our materials to an online context. And although we had not planned to use those going forward, once we can return to face-to-face, it turns out that they're actually really good for families. So kind of a silver lining there in the COVID instruction. So that's an exciting next step for us. So I'll stop there, leaving other folks plenty of time, but I'm happy to answer questions about the project at the appropriate time. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Anne-Marie, for telling us about this interesting work. Next up, you'll see that as we progress through the program, we've tried to highlight scholars with different, who study different aspects of children and adolescents learning, some more focused on teacher education, some more focused on the children themselves. And next up, I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Janelle Bailey, who is an assistant professor in our college. She's going to be telling us about her work on teaching critical evaluation in science. Take it away, Janelle.
And despite a year of Zoom, I was still muted. Thank you so much, Julie. I appreciate the invitation to participate today. And I'll say thank you to President Englert and to the OVPR staff for putting this together and allowing us to be part of it. This has been a really great experience. This particular project is funded by the National Science Foundation, and Kimberly, if you could go ahead and go to the next slide. And we're currently in our 3rd phase of grants. The first 2 came to Temple University, the 3rd one to our partner at the University of Maryland, College Park. And what we are looking at is helping students develop skills around scientific practices. In other words, what it is that scientists do and what they know and how they know it. So science often has this kind of misconception in the public about that it's a list of facts that need to be memorized, or things that that you can just learn or remember and not really have to do anything. But really, science is much more complex. It's a way of thinking, a way of investigating the world that has norms, that has procedures and policies that help guide us in a way of thinking systematically about things. This particular diagram comes from the National Research Council's framework for K-12 science education. And it shows a variety of pieces, or what we call practices, that go into doing science, that we're trying to help students come together and understand. And so many of our state standards in science are built around these are very similar ideas. And so as you can see here, there's several things we want to focus about: asking questions and making observations about the real world, about what's going on around us. We want to have students collect data and test solutions, design experiments, make measurements. They look at theories and models, and that takes imagination and reasoning. They calculate things and make predictions about things, all of which lead us to formulating hypotheses and proposing solutions to problems. What's at the crux of this, in the center of this diagram, is this idea of evaluating. And that's a really important piece of science that a lot of people don't necessarily know about. Science doesn't just take the first answer that's thrown out, right? Instead, we take all the different ideas and we look at the evidence for them, the data that supports them, and say, which one is better? Which one has more evidence supporting it? Which ones have evidence that contradicts our hypotheses, and so that maybe we should question those? This idea of evaluation is a really important piece, and that's what we're going to try to help students do. So on the next slide, you'll see a scaffold about how we do this. So this is called a model evidence link diagram, and we use this with middle and high school students to help them think about alternative explanations for a scientific phenomenon. So this particular example is around climate change, and in the center, there's two different models. Our current climate change is caused by increasing amounts of gas released by human activities, or model B, our current climate change is caused by increasing amounts of energy released from the sun. And through a scaffolded process of reading scientific text, looking at graphs and diagrams that involve data, and deciding which of these pieces of evidence, how those relate to each of the two models by drawing these series of arrows. And you can see each different type of arrow has a different relationship between the type of evidence and the model. And as we get students to do that and have these rich conversations about which type of arrow do I want to draw and why do we think that's the right one, and what does that mean? What we end up getting students to do is not just say, well, I heard that model A is what scientists think. Rather, they look at the body of evidence against both model A and model B and come to the conclusion, ideally, that model A is in fact the scientifically accurate representation of what's happening with climate change in this particular example. We have 8 of these models right now, or eight of these scaffolds in Earth and Space Science. We use these with classes, middle and high school classes, in earth science classes and environmental science classes. And all of our topics focus on things that tend to be kind of complex and sometimes controversial in terms of the public's perception of the topics, such as climate change, even when the scientists don't really think it's all that controversial. And our early results are showing that using these kind of scaffolds is helping students learn the science content and be more evaluative in general. As Anne-Marie said, COVID has slowed us down a little bit. We had to make some pivots, and we brought Insa Khan onto our team to help us think about how we can do these in a virtual setting. And we're in the midst of testing those now. So we're really excited that all of these activities seem to be showing promise, and we look forward to even more studies next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Janelle. This work is always important, but I think that we can all agree as educators of students in higher education that the more that students come to us with this ability to critically evaluate claims and evaluate evidence, I think it makes our jobs easier in teaching them, and it makes us a better society. So thank you for this important work. Next up, we have Dr. Tim Patterson, who is also an assistant professor in the College of Education and Human Development. Tim.
Thank you, Julie. Excited to be here. So a few years ago, you might recall a controversy involving Scholastic books and their publication of a book called A Birthday Cake for George Washington. And in that book, it depicts Hercules, one of George Washington's real-life enslaved persons, his chef, in fact, and Delia, Hercules' real-life daughter and narrator of the book, as they go on an adventurous romp through 18th century Philadelphia to find a substitute for sugar for the president's birthday cake. And if that sounds like a misguided premise for a children's book about enslavement, the actual book was much worse than my brief description conveys. It caused quite an uproar for not only the tone of the narrative, but the associated illustrations. And the controversy had me wondering, what are elementary teachers likely to be reading with their students? And so what came out of that question was this content analysis that focused on both the narratives of children's books that relate to enslavement and the literary features, as well as the artwork, which is oftentimes not studied when examining children's literature, at least historical children's literature. So myself and a colleague used critical race theory and the research traditions on African-American subjects in children's literature to develop 3 depictions on historical enslavement. Next slide, please. So here on this slide, you'll see a continuum that lays out the books in our study across 3 depictions of enslavement. And so I'll quickly run through the three depictions and talk about the implications of them. So we classified books that offer readers a narrow or simplified version of historical events as selective tradition books. In depicting enslavement, such books minimize or exclude the violence of enslavement, show masters or enslaved persons working happily together or as equals, or omit enslaved persons from events in which they played prominent roles. In some selective tradition books emphasize the quote better aspects of the slave system over a more honest telling of US history, such as A Birthday Cake for George Washington would be an exemplary version of a selective tradition book. These were the fewest books in our data set, but they were also among the most recently published, which was a troubling finding. Second depiction are social conscious books. Social conscious books offer mixed portrayals of enslavement. In such books, enslavement is a joyless, painful experience, but subtle misrepresentations often pervade the narrative text or illustrations or both. While they are honest in their portrayal of enslavement, social conscious books are also likely to point readers' attentions away from the institutional nature of enslavement by presenting the violence of enslavement in passive voice, or by focusing on masters who are generally immoral individuals rather than part of a larger economic and moral system. Thus, social conscious books are often historically accurate, though not historically representative. Finally, in culturally conscious books, the systemic nature of enslavement is a theme throughout the narrative and illustrations, unlike selective tradition and social conscious books. Books that expressly depict enslaved peoples as property, that describe violence against enslaved persons in active voice, contain linguistic styles associated with African Americans, and affirmative portrayals of skin color are culturally conscious. The most common depiction among the early childhood books are those that made attempts at social conscious, the middle ground perspective. However, there remained a troubling number of books that reflected the selective tradition interpretation. What's important to emphasize is that there's not a dominant depiction of enslavement across children's literature that depict this topic. Rather, there's an array of interpretations evident in children's historical literature. Now, I'm not recommending books from any one particular category, though it's probably clear which books I have my own kids here at home reading. Rather, there are educational potentials in using books from any of the categories. We propose actually setting books from categories side by side. Each interpretation has its own instructional implications that require careful scaffolding, which we highlight in our articles. The selective tradition depictions may seem obviously bad to this audience, and you may be envisioning the ways in which problematic elements of social conscious books could complicate students' learning about enslavement. However, elementary teachers report not feeling much confidence in their own historical knowledge. Further, elementary teachers will likely integrate social studies into reading lessons. They don't have a textbook necessarily, and they may uncritically present these books to their students. In addition, there is much bad teaching associated with enslavement across the grade levels, kindergarten through 12th grade. Thus, we hope this research provides elementary teachers with a set of criteria for choosing books for their students to read, and more importantly, a set of questions they might use to help their students interrogate the narratives and illustrations in those books. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. This is, again, fascinating work. I want to take the time now to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Insa Khan, who is, again, an assistant professor in our College of Education and Human Development. Take it away, Insa.
Thanks, Julie. And thank you for the opportunity to present in this great event today, honoring President Englert. As an educational technology researcher, I've been interested in studying how students learn with emerging technologies, and I will share one most recent study that was funded by Korean government about the use of virtual reality for increasing empathy and the implications this study has for education. Next slide, please. Many of you may already know what VR is, because if you go to a mall or a science museum, you can find VR demonstration spaces. These devices are particularly of interest in educational setting because it provides more immersive and engaging learning experiences. Previous studies, including my own, consistently demonstrate that this immersive device increases presence, that is, a subjective feeling of being in one place, which then enhances affective outcomes such as engagement, motivation, interest, and satisfaction. While conducting research, I've got more interested in knowing what other effective outcomes this immersive technology can support in educational settings. For the past few years, I felt the importance of empathy more than ever after noticing the societal divides that have gotten wider among people with diverse backgrounds. At the same time, in education, we see a growing emphasis on developing global and cultural competencies among both students and teachers. And I found that there is a strong connection between the experiences that this immersive VR can offer and the development of empathy. Kim, you can click once on the slide. Here, I try to connect these two through the lens of perspective taking. There is proven evidence that immersive VR enhances embodiment and increases presence and engagement, which altogether allows students to easily take what's presented in VR as their own experiences. Also, perspective taking has been used as an effective educational strategy for increasing empathy, because to comprehend others' emotional states and feel empathy, people need to think in someone else's shoes and experience the situation from a first-person perspective. So a recent funded project of my colleague and myself explored the possibility of enhancing perspective taking through immersive VR and increasing empathy among pre-service teachers. Next slide. This project examines the relationship between emergent levels and perspective taking types and how they interplayed in affecting empathy, as you can see on the left and the right. From the data collected from 148 pre-service teachers, we found an interesting interaction effect suggesting that perspective taking interplays with the level of immersion in triggering emotional reactions. For example, on the right, participants reported a higher level of empathy when they watched the content presented from a self perspective with high immersion VR with the head-mounted display. It may be due to the maximized level of embodiment and presence that triggered stronger emotional reaction, as they felt they were the ones who experienced the situation in VR. However, when the participants took the observer's perspective, as you can see on the left, there was a distance between the participants and the people in VR who they showed empathy towards. So in this case, it is the contextual information provided by the narrations in the VR, not the sense of embodiment or presence, that enhanced the participants' understanding about the situation and evoked the feeling of empathy. Such perspective taking was well paired with the low level of immersion to produce stronger empathetic responses. I believe that empathy and intercultural awareness will become more important in this interconnected world. And I really hope that the technology can contribute to create a safe, engaging learning space for learners to practice and develop necessary skills and knowledge to grow into global citizens. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Insa. Yes, this work is, of course, all the more relevant in our time of COVID and virtual learning. And there are so many different innovative ways that people have tried to infuse technology into education. And Insa is our premier expert in the college on learning through technology and learning about technology. Next, we have Dr. Leah Sandalos, who is, again, an assistant professor in the College of Ed and Human Development. And she's going to be telling us about work on teacher-child relationships and the impact of those relationships on children's academic and socio-emotional outcomes. Leah.
Thank you, Julie. I'm so delighted to be part of this presentation today and to hear about the important work that my wonderful colleagues are engaged in. So there's a saying in education that you need to Maslow before you can bloom. This statement refers to two famous frameworks, Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Bloom's taxonomy. And simply put, it's the idea that educators need to meet students' basic needs of feelings of safety and belonging before students can engage in academically challenging work. Meeting these basic needs is where teacher-child relationships can play a critical role. Positive relationships can look different depending on the composition of students and teachers involved, but there are some core elements of these relationships that do seem to emerge consistently in educational literature and that I've examined in my own research. So that's what I'll be discussing today. One key element is the cultivation of a warm and supportive classroom climate. Teachers can be emotionally supportive in their interactions with students by fostering a dynamic of mutual respect and positive communication, conveying to students that their perspective is important and that they matter as individuals. Those are key aspects of the supportive climate, and they can facilitate students' willingness to take academic risks. In my own research on late elementary and middle school years, I found that students' perception of whether or not their teacher cares about them actually directly relates to growth in their own social emotional skills. This shows that teachers' own caring behaviors can potentially serve as models for students' behavior. Another essential aspect of student-teacher interactions is classroom management and organization. At any age, it's important for students to know what is expected of them when they come into the classroom. And this includes a typical routine, classroom norms and procedures. Teachers know a lot of downtime can lead to problems, so making sure there's a clear routine in place can go a long way. And across studies, higher classroom organization does tend to relate to more time spent learning during the school day. A third critical component that I've studied is instructional support and expectations. Instructional supports will vary based on content, grade level, student learning needs. But one strategy I do want to highlight is the importance of relating academic content to children's real-world experiences and backgrounds. As one example of the benefits of the strategy, my colleagues and I found that kindergartners who were dual language learners made greater gains in their early reading skills if their teachers connected new concepts to students' background knowledge and past experiences. I also want to highlight the role of teacher expectations as a component of teacher-child relationships. Prior research, which includes my own work, has shown that teachers' expression of holding high expectations for all students and conveying a belief in the student's ability to meet those expectations does positively influence students' academic achievement, and it can be particularly salient for students from historically marginalized groups who may have faced persistent inequities in their educational experiences. You may or may not have heard of the term warm demander, and this is a term sometimes used to refer to a teacher that effectively uses many of these strategies I've mentioned in order to provide students with both a sense of safety and belonging in the classroom, but also conveying those high expectations and belief in their abilities as a student. Notably, something that we see is that teachers who are consistent in their efforts to build strong student-teacher relationships will yield the strongest outcomes. So variability or unpredictability in these behaviors can actually sometimes be detrimental for students. Students really need to know what they can expect when they walk into the classroom on a given day. And if we've learned anything from the pandemic, it's that school really does serve as an important safe haven for many students. And I do want to end on an important note about supporting teachers too, which is also a big emphasis of my research. Increasing research has shown that teachers do report high levels of stress and burnout related to their jobs, and that this has only gotten worse in the past year. Teachers who don't have those emotional resources available will struggle to build strong relationships with students. And I found this actually in several studies of my own that look at classroom interactions. So when we think about a classroom that is supportive of students, I would encourage all of us to simultaneously consider ways that our school systems and society can also be more supportive of our nation's teachers. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Well, to close out the fire hose portion of the presentation today, I'm going to tell you about my own work. As Michelle said at the beginning, I'm the Deputy Dean of the college and also a professor. And I want to tell you about the work that I've been doing over the last 15 years with the Strategic Education Research Partnership around supporting K-12 students' learning of mathematics content by example. This work has been carried out with support with a series of grants from the US Department of Education. A lot of people, both children and adults, struggle with mathematics, and this can have an unfortunate impact on their college and career prospects. One of the reasons why mathematics proves difficult for people is that many individuals hold misconceptions about critical mathematics concepts. Sometimes those misconceptions are driven by the way that we teach those concepts earlier on in students' education. But these misconceptions actually interfere with students' ability to learn new information later. And in fact, they interfere with how those students even interpret or view new information that might be presented to them in a course. This work then focuses on how we transform students' practice time to help dislodge these misconceptions and therefore support their learning of new content. If you could advance the slide. So the work in general is focused around what we call learning math by example. And the work is driven by using cognitive science principles about how students learn from errors or from explaining themselves or from working with examples in order to improve mathematics education. So my work finds that having students explain correct and incorrect examples during their problem-solving practice actually improves their learning of new content. So what this means is that essentially, instead of just solving a long string of practice problems on their own, a practice that is ubiquitous in mathematics classrooms, both in K-12 and in the college format, we replace some of the problems that the students would solve on their own with correct or incorrect examples of how other students might have solved those problems. We clearly mark whether the solution shown is correct or incorrect, and ask the student targeted questions to get at their understanding of why the procedure shown is correct or incorrect and how the features in the problem work together to inform what kind of process would be most appropriate. The materials that we've developed in this project are developed and tested in the context of a very strong research practice partnership with school districts around the United States. And what this means is that while my team and myself are the scholars in this work that bring the literature background and the knowledge from previous studies that we've done, we acknowledge that teachers who are on the ground every day, special ed teachers who might be working with individual students, or coordinators within school districts that are helping their teachers to make decisions about curriculum and the enactment of that curriculum, have a lot to bring to the table in terms of thinking about what those misconceptions are that students hold that we really need to address in order to allow them to move forward and better understand the new content that they're expected to learn. So there are two related projects here that I'm just going to walk you through briefly. The first is what we call Algebra by Example. And this is a set of 42 classroom assignments that were developed in context of a strong research practice partnership, where we cover the content that is taught in a typical Algebra 1 class, not with any one particular curriculum. And again, we replace half of the problems that students would normally solve in their practice sessions with correct or incorrect examples of how other students might solve the problems. And then ask the student to consider what's going on in the example and explain why it is or isn't correct and what is going on, what the student might be thinking. And you can see in the bottom left, very small thumbnails of what the front and back of one of those assignments look like. So instead of solving 8 problems on their own, which might typically occur after a lesson, the students have 2 correct examples to explain, 2 incorrect examples to explain, and 4 problems that are related for them to solve and get experience practicing themselves. These have been tested with thousands of students in schools across the country, and our classroom studies that have taken place over the course of entire school years demonstrate that there are benefits for middle and high schoolers who are in real world classrooms learning Algebra 1 in terms of how much they gain in terms of their understanding of conceptual and procedural ideas in the course, and also their performance on standardized test items, which, like it or not, are a common metric that school districts across the United States are forced to care about and be concerned about. One of the exciting things about this study that is not even necessarily intuitive is that there is an even greater benefit for students with low prior knowledge. They tend to gain more conceptual knowledge through the use of these materials, which is interesting because most teachers And many of you perhaps would be of the mindset that students who are struggling may need more support with just practicing on their own, and showing them incorrect examples of things might confuse them or might make them think that that's the right way to do it, and that really we need to focus on errorless learning for students who struggle. But in fact, our research says the opposite, that this is the most beneficial for students who come into the content with low prior knowledge and understanding from their previous work. Could you go to the next slide? Oh, that was, yes, the algebra by example. And then we followed up that work with the development of math by example, which is a similar series of curricular materials for 4th and 5th grade math. The reason that we went in this direction is that in studying the types of misconceptions that students studying Algebra 1 had, we realized that many of them were ideas that the students would have learned in 4th or 5th grade math or in middle school math, and that they persisted and not been corrected over the years through traditional instruction. So we went backwards and to create materials to try to address these misconceptions and dislodge them earlier on in 4th or 5th grade. So again, we have, I think it's about 120 assignments across 4th and 5th grade. And here you can see some changes in the thumbnails as these assignments are geared towards younger children. But the idea is the same, having students explain these correct and incorrect examples instead of just trying to solve the problems on their own. And what we find here, again, through year-long classroom studies, is that 4th and 5th grade math by example students outscored students who just did more traditional practice on all of the key grade level concepts and procedures that we were testing, and also on the released items from the 5th grade PARC test. This is a common standardized test that's aligned to the Common Core. We also found that using these materials made it such that the students were more ready to learn algebra by the end of the 5th grade, which again is still early. They're not going to typically start algebra in 6th grade, but that dislodging these misconceptions early on is getting them better prepared to learn the algebraic content that starts getting infused in their middle school math. One other interesting thing that I want to mention is that as with all of the work that's done with Strategic Education Research Partnership, or SERP, all of the student and teacher materials that we develop are freely available to download, print, and distribute through a Creative Commons license. So we develop this in conjunction with school districts and with support from the U.S. Department of Education, but there is no charge for teachers anywhere to use these with their students. And for the Math by Example work, I wanted to highlight that since this was posted just about 2 years ago, so in about May of 2019, we've already had 30,000 downloads of Math by Example materials and 10,000 unique website visitors that come from across all 50 states and 82 countries. So just want to put in a plug for the work that the important work that all of us do in the College of Education and Human Development to help improve students' learning. That this is an additional component and aspect that we can take. We have things that we might have created that can help, and that we want to make sure that they get into classrooms, because that's how we have the biggest impact. So I want to transition us into the Q&A section of the event. I have received a couple of questions through Q&A, and I'll ask our panelists, yes, to all join in here as appropriate. But the first question I want to ask comes from one of our audience members. Research areas are sometimes motivated by personal interest. If so, what motivated our speakers to explore these rich research projects? Anybody want to go first?
I'll take a stab at it. So I mentioned the controversy being something of an inspiration, but also having two wee ones here at home, one's upstairs doing 3rd grade right now. I was just very interested in general about what young people are likely to be reading. And that's how we collected the books that we did. Was we wanted to find books that were likely in school libraries or available to elementary teachers. And then the other piece is I'm on the advisory board for the Teaching Tolerance Project. And we had developed a framework for teaching hard history. And out of that framework was a survey, or part of that framework, developing that framework was a survey of teachers who just reported in general feeling really unprepared to teach about enslavement and other difficult topics like that. So that all sort of came together in sort of a personal and a professional way for me.
Thank you, Tim. Any others?
I think for myself and my collaborators, you know, there's a lot of talk about the need for STEM majors and that sort of thing. I think having STEM majors is great, and we love them, they're wonderful, but we also recognize that there's a lot of value and importance in people who don't necessarily want to do STEM, but who still understand it at a level to be able to be engaged in the problems of today's world. And so there's a big interest for us in helping students use their science to be able to think about science. And in particular, the PI of the project, Ed Lombardi, who's at the University of Maryland College Park and formerly of Temple, he's doing a lot of work right now in information weaponization and how it is that we're blasted from all sides with a variety of information, and how is it that people take that in and how they interpret it and think about it. Now, there's a lot of ways to handle that, including things like, how do you know what the source of the information is, and that sort of thing. And this particular project that I described doesn't deal with all of that, just focuses on this one particular thing. And I think that's really, it's a nice example of how science works that can be applied in a lot of ways. And Tim and I have actually talked about ways that we could incorporate the same type of scaffold in history and social studies education, and hope to maybe talk about future projects down the road where we can collaborate to take this thing that we think is actually pretty useful beyond science, and apply it broadly. And I think, like I said, for me personally, that idea that you don't necessarily have to become a STEM major, but I want you to understand and not be afraid of science if you're not going to be a STEM major, that's really important. And in particular, when I've worked with teachers and elementary teachers in particular, that's been a big part of it, is let me help you be more comfortable and think about it in a way that's productive.
I can pop in here as well and say that in terms of my background, I was one of those kids for whom math was my favorite subject in school. I spent a lot of time tutoring kids, and I fully intended to go to college as a math major and actually began the math major. But I started to become more interested in how people think about math rather than in doing the mathematics myself. Obviously, you have to understand how to do it. And so I've been more fascinated by the idea that different people think differently about the mathematics content, that it may interfere with their ability to learn. And in particular, that I think that historically, at least whenever I was in school, math teachers tend to present the information as, this is what it is, you have to learn it. And if you don't learn it, there's something wrong with you, rather than there might be something wrong with the way that it's being taught. And so have just been inspired by trying to help teachers also understand that those that consider themselves math people might learn differently than the rest of the students that they might see in their classroom. And they can't teach math the way that they were taught and expect the same outcome of all students, that they really need to think about how students think and learn in just making decisions about how to present information in the classroom, how to give students effective practice time, and how to really support that learning, as opposed to the more traditional methods for teaching math.
I think I can add as well, from my own perspective as a professional scholar and also a mother scholar who raised 2 little boys at home. Initially, I was, of course, trained as an educational technologist, but at the same time, I had a cognitive science background as well. So when I started my journey in doctoral course and doctoral program, I was initially mainly focused on academic performance, how we can increase the students' cognitive performances in terms of test performances, and how much they can actually understand some of the concepts in math and sciences with the technology, with the design of technology. But as I grew my raise my children, I sometimes think that maybe, of course, academic performance is important, but what's more important for our kids is to develop the kind of social emotional competencies and empathy towards others. And I think that also tied into their academic performance too, in a way. And at the same time, when I did my research with technology and also from reading others' research, a lot of papers, I realized that technology can actually, there are a lot of evidence showing that the technology can improve students' motivation and interest. But there are a lot of mixed results showing that how technology can actually support their academic learning, because there are so many different affordances that leads in a different way. So in a way that the technology can be used kind of differently affect the student learning. So there are mixed results in terms of learning performances. So I do see that there is a great potential to increase students' effective outcomes, as I presented before. And especially these days, I think the empathy and the global competency and intercultural competency is one of those things that I really want to highlight as an ultimate outcome among students, not as just increased interest or their motivation that ultimately lead to the academic performance. I just wanted to deal with this academic effective outcomes as an alternative educational goals that I really want to target for our students and my own kids as well.
Thank you. Leah, do you want to tell us a little bit about your motivation?
Sure, absolutely. So I am trained as a school psychologist, and I think from the lens that I come from, I do tend to mix the education and the social emotional in the way I look at classrooms. And I have spent a lot of time observing in classrooms, both as a school psychologist, a teaching assistant, and as a graduate researcher. And something that really inspired me when I was observing in classrooms were those teachers that seemed to have this magical way of being both warm and also like having enabling students to really work up to their potential and you know, try as hard as they could. And it was just a really fascinating combination of skills that I saw in some teachers. And so it inspired me to go back to the research and try to understand what are these characteristics and how in some teachers it's really natural, in other teachers it seems like we can really help build those skills and then create a great learning environment for everybody involved. So that's where I'm coming from, the mix of psychology and education.
And Anne-Marie?
Mine's pretty simple. I spent a lot of time in preschool and infant toddler classrooms. And as you look around, there are a lot of kids that nobody talks to. And those are often the kids who have the hardest time talking. So if teachers ask a question and the kids don't know how to respond, teachers don't generally have a lot of strategies in their pocket they can pull out to say, well, let me ask a yes/no question, or let me ask this child a closed question instead. So that's a problem that I wanted to fix. And ultimately, if you want kids to be able to reason effectively and learn about hard history and develop empathy, they're going to need language. So our hope is that if we can work with these kids early on, it'll put them in a better place moving forward to come to these beautiful interventions that other folks on our panel are developing and be successful.
Thank you. So the next question is a timely one about the experiences that we're having now with COVID. And I wonder if everyone or if some of you want to share maybe even just a brief piece of advice that you think comes from your work that informs us on how to get through the learning during the pandemic, or teaching during the pandemic, or working with our own children during the pandemic. Is there anything from your work that would help inform the listeners in the audience that they might find interesting?
I can jump in and make something up. So honestly, what we found in the pandemic, in our work with young kids, is that families are really critically important. And I think that was probably true all along. And we pay a lot of lip service to it in education, but there aren't really a lot of programs out there that that really draw families in to tell them exactly what's happening in classrooms and give them information that they can use to complement what kids just learned in the classroom. So I think we have really come to appreciate the value of families and the importance of thinking about ways that our classroom interventions could potentially be extended to include families who are interested in picking up that kind of extension.
And
I think that's
off
really
Anne-Marie's-
go ahead, Janelle.
Thanks. I was going to say, building off Anne-Marie's comment, what we're finding in our project is how critical students' discussions around these topics are. And so what we're seeing online is those discussions are not nearly as rich as when we were in person. Sometimes that's a structural thing because, for example, in some of our schools, the teachers aren't allowed to use breakout rooms for Zoom. And so it's just not really possible to have an in-depth discussion with 15 to 30 kids at the same time, whereas if you can put them in groups of 3 to 5, it's much more reasonable. There's also some systemic issues such as the students' ability to have stable internet and a quiet background where they're comfortable turning their microphones on to engage in the conversation. But there's also just this idea of how comfortable are they talking, and some of that is their own language development, whether English is their first or second or third or fourth language. Some of it is their confidence in their ability to do school, right? And a lot of it is that they don't want to say something that they think is wrong. They've gotten used to it has to be the right answer, and therefore I don't want to put forth something that I'm not confident with. And so those conversations are really, really rich. And so if I were going to say something to a parent who's trying to help their kid out, I would say try to encourage them to take guests, to engage in the conversation, and try to help them facilitate their environment such that that they feel safe and comfortable to do so.
I think I can add to that. Janelle made a great point about telling parents about how to help their kids. But I can also add from an instructional designer's point of view, how we can actually design our instruction. If we are a teacher, then how we can design our lesson in this challenging time. It's not really directly related to my research that I previously presented, but empathy is at the core, so it's in the line. And it's the project that I'm planning right now for the next project. It's called Empathic Instructional Design. So when you, as an instructional designer, when you plan your instruction, you actually do the needs analysis of your students, where they are in terms of their learning and where they need to reach at the end of the instruction. So we usually do that a lot of times, but we oftentimes do not really think about their emotional reactions when they were engaged in that particular moment. And it's particularly important in this challenging time because everything actually moved to emergency transition to online, and everybody actually struggled, including instructors. So I think this is the time where we really need to think about when you give some kind of technology to a student, how they would react when they use technology. There will be some glitches among technology, and because of that, their emotional experience will be down, of course, negative. And then that will probably affect their learning performances too. So this emotion and their reactions are really an important part in their learning. So when we design our instruction, we also have to think about how they would feel about that at that time and moment. So we need to build our skill to forecast in terms of their emotional reactions in the instruction, I think.
I don't have advice, but more of a curiosity that these three comments and the question have provoked in me about the research that I've done, which is, I think parents and guardians are potentially more aware of the instructional resources that are being used by their children's teachers because so much of it's happening at home. And with the books in the study that I did, the selective tradition books, for instance, the George Washington book that I mentioned at the beginning, I mean, Scholastic went through all the trouble of creating this book, right? It was vetted by however they, I mean, Scholastic is a massive publisher, it was reviewed by the traditional children's literature publications, and there wasn't a problem with it. And it wasn't till parents began reading it, and there was a hashtag slavery with a smile. So if you look at that book, of the 61 times enslaved persons are depicted, 47 of them show them smiling, outwardly happy. And parents of color, especially Black parents specifically, were saying, well, this does not track at all with the cultural history that I know. And it was only through this social media campaign that people became aware of this book. So I wonder, to what extent are teachers needing to be more aware of their children's cultural backgrounds as they select historical and social studies based resources for their children, because they have to be more involved, or at least families can be more involved in the work of their in the classrooms, because the classrooms are at home.
I'll add one other comment. This semester, I've actually been doing phone interviews with teachers asking about their experience in the pandemic. And one teacher who was a teacher of theater arts brought up a really important and interesting point that I hadn't really thought deeply about. She said that there are certain outlets in schools that are really important for students' social emotional growth, and something that they really rely on to get through elementary, middle school, high school. And she said, as a teacher of the arts, that's something that was really lost in the pandemic. Students couldn't be involved in that, and it's been really especially hard to do that via Zoom. And so her message through the interview is just, don't forget about those specialist teachers who do really important work that support students, makes them happy in school, and that hasn't really been able to flourish as much in this virtual learning. So just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Our next question is one that is near and dear to my heart. Some of my colleagues will probably laugh whenever I even read it, but we have a question from the audience about learning styles and whether there are particular learning styles in this case that are specific to males versus females and how they learn. My colleagues may laugh because this is, I talked in my own work about misconceptions that our students have about math and how it makes it difficult for them to learn new mathematical content. This is one of the biggest misconceptions in education. Learning styles do not exist. Let me repeat that because I may be blowing your mind here, but learning styles don't exist. It perpetuates because it seems like they exist, but the scientific evidence actually, there is no scientific evidence that suggests that they actually do. What this means is when you hear somebody say that they are a visual learner or an auditory learner, they might think that they learn best by seeing the information or by hearing the information, when in reality, we all learn best from having the information presented to us in multiple modalities, and the particular modalities that are most helpful are more dependent on the content that's being presented than on the learner. Everybody can benefit from seeing or hearing or hands-on activities, but this is something that is a very perpetual question that those of us in education research get about how the best way for people to learn. And they might have preferences. You may feel that you learn best from from seeing things because you prefer to learn that way. And that can be very real. But in terms of actual outcomes of who learns best from what, it is way more tied to the content and what is the best way to present that content, rather than anything about the individual learner and how they're best prepped to receive the information. And this is definitely true in mathematics, but it's true in other domains as well. Does anybody want to chime in? I apologize, I'll get off of my soapbox, but.
No, actually, when I saw the question, I kind of knew where you were likely to go. That preferences thing, I think, is really important, though. We certainly do. I think many of us have a preference in how we would like material to be presented to us. And again, I think if you think about, the variety of kids in a classroom, there's going to be a lot of different preferences. And so not only do you benefit from multiple modalities in terms of their being able to understand the content, but also in terms of their willingness to engage with things. And so if you attend to the fact that you need to present things in multiple modalities and give them the opportunities to experience things that are more kinesthetic, where you get them up and moving and acting out things. So for example, we have students sometimes stand up and tilt in a certain direction and walk around a lamp and pretend to be the Earth orbiting the sun, or getting them to make Instagram posts about the different components of the water cycle, whatever it happens to be. If you can hit multiple of those, students are going to be more likely to be engaged at least 1 or 2 points in this series, even if they're not necessarily fully engaged in everything. And that just increases the chances for learning. And so when I work with pre-service teachers, this is a big part of what we try to do, is to get them away from thinking about learning styles to instead thinking about learning preferences, and that regardless of what your preference is, multiple modes really benefit the vast majority of students, and really kind of help the larger group at large.
So as what I think will be our last question, we can move out of our specific research topics, though there may be things from our research that inform our impressions of how to answer this question. But there's a question about how we think that the experiences that everyone has gone through this year will influence teaching and learning going forward. What's going to be different when we come out of this on the other side?
I can comment on that for young kids. I don't think a lot's going to be different for young kids. I am here to tell you that 2-year-olds do not learn well by Zoom, nor do preschoolers. So teachers hated it, kids hated it, everybody hated it. There were occasional moments of fun, you can sing with the kids, but not, really that whole hands-on learning in the classroom thing. Hands-on, minds-on, that's pretty essential for little kids. So I would defer to my colleagues about what happens in 1st grade and up, but I don't see a sea change coming in early learning. I do think, though, that there are many fabulous tools that we've developed that could be used, as I mentioned, to integrate parents a little bit more into the classroom. So one of the biggest stumbling blocks in early childhood family involvement is that families don't often come into the classroom. They're working. That's why they put the kids in childcare. So I think there's a whole universe of opportunity there. But in terms of instruction for little kids, I don't see a lot of opportunity. I don't think we've learned a ton from COVID that we would really want to keep going forward.
I think what I'm seeing with teachers in science is that some of the tools we're using will continue even when we return to face-to-face classroom instruction. I was in classrooms yesterday where the school is pretty technology driven. They're a paperless school, and so all the students have iPads, and they've been using that regardless. But particularly the student teachers who are in that school, they're being exposed to so much more technology through this year that I think they'll be able to carry that forward. And I think that the students, to some extent, will be more adept at using that technology for learning. I say that with caution because I think what we've seen is we make assumptions about how good kids are with tech, and they really are, with a very narrow slice of tech, right? They're really good at TikTok, or they're really good at texting, but ask them to open an email and they're struggling. And I'm like, really? Because I've been using email since, so there's not necessarily, yes, they're good with some tech, but not necessarily with all. But opening teachers up to that exposure and thinking about not just how to use tech, but how to use it effectively, I think that's going to be one thing that, at least for teachers of older grades, may make a difference and may carry on.
I think that just as we close things out, I'll end with somewhat of a cheeky comment on this, but I think that one of the biggest changes that we're going to see going forward is that I'm pretty sure snow days are a thing of the past, and that now that our students have been forced to learn in a remote setting, even if it's not ideal and even if it works better for certain age groups than others, I think that our schools have learned that rather than tacking days on later on or taking away planned vacation days, that they're gonna believe that this is a better way to go now that we're more equipped, at least, to be able to handle some remote learning if we can't be physically in a school building. Thank you all for your questions. I'm going to turn things back over to Kimberly to finish us out, but thank you for joining us. It's been really a pleasure.
Thank you, Julie, for moderating this panel for us in this discussion. A big thank you to all of our speakers for the session today. As a reminder, the meeting recording and the slides will be posted on our website shortly. Thank you all for participating, and don't forget to join us for tomorrow's roundtable on Temple University's extraordinary research response to the challenge of COVID-19, featuring keynote speaker Dr. Jody Black, Director of Clinical Policy and Programs at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Have a nice day.